This meeting is being recorded.
Afshin Molavi, it's 15th of March. Welcome to BRI Dialogues.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see both of you.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. The world is going through a lot of challenges, but one thing that comes to mind, and the topic of BRI in China, with all that has happened with SWIFT and and the sanctions on Central Bank of Russia, which is another war in the past 20 years and geopolitical crisis. What do you think is happening in the corridors of China, looking at this rapid ensemble of Western hemisphere and banning and cutting off from SWIFT? And is this a prelude to a de-dollarization? Afshin, do you think that we are seeing a decoupling in motion, aggregated and accelerated?
It's a good question, Ali. The way I see it is, if you are sitting in Beijing, one thing you have to be impressed by is the shock and awe nature of the decoupling of Russia from the global economic system, right? I mean, you're taking quite a significant economy and you're barricading key parts of it, right? I mean, not oil and gas. The oil is still flowing through pipelines. Gas is still flowing through pipelines to Europe. But in a sense, the outside world has imposed a financial crisis on Russia because of what Russia is doing to Ukraine. So if you are China and you're looking at that, you're saying, wow, these Western powers truly do have significant power. And we talk a lot about globalization and Western multinational companies, right? And crossing borders. But at the end of the day, national power, sovereignty, what we're seeing is how important those still are, and how a global multinational companies that may be headquartered somewhere will follow a particular line of a government, right? Now, some of these global multinational companies may genuinely feel that they don't want to do business, in Russia, et cetera, as a result of what they've done. Some of them are reacting to this climate. Now, in terms of a decoupling, when you look at the China-U.S. relationship, which is the most significant geoeconomic relationship, the most significant geopolitical relationship today, I'm seeing very modest decoupling when it comes to trade. We're still talking about a 600 billion plus trade relationship. We're still talking about Chinese companies throughout U.S. supply chains, intermediate goods, finished goods, you name it, right? So now, but what we are also seeing a significant amount of U.S. financial services companies recently taking advantage of liberalization in China's financial markets to set up shop there, whether it's BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, right? So what's fascinating about sitting here in Washington is that there is a national security establishment conversation about China, which is, great power competition, competitor, potential existential threat. And then there's a business community conversation about China, which is different in the United States, right? Which is, massive market, rapidly urbanized, growing middle class, right? And so I don't see a significant in any way decoupling between the U.S. and China, significant decoupling between China and Europe. Now, when it comes to dollarization, the yuan is very modest compared to the dollar when it comes to global transactions. And what we've seen, and what Russia has seen, and what China has likely seen, is that you can have trillions of dollars of foreign exchange reserves, but guess what? If you are on the wrong side of the Western world, so to speak, you could get those reserves frozen. And you won't have access to those foreign exchange reserves. And so in many ways, what we've seen and what Russia has seen is very similar to what Iran has seen over the years, right? They have seen the enormous power of the dollar, the U.S. and Western Europe's financial systems in closing them off from the rest of the world. And so I haven't seen so China is probably looking at this and saying, this is very impressive shock and awe.
Well, I couldn't agree more with you, and I'm sure Anush as well, about the moves of David Solomons of the world and looking after the savings in China. And this intertwined relationship reminds me of a rather impolite joke, but it's good to bring smile to both of your faces. This guy goes to the dentist and lays down on the unit, and the doctor comes, and as he's drilling, he grabs the testicles of the doctor and says, "Doctor, we're not going to hurt each other, are we?" So I don't, I don't know how much of that is basically in that relationship, but I'm sure it's sending jitters in Beijing about, access to foreign reserves, Afshin.
Yes, absolutely.
Afshin, that's a wonderful opening comment. You recall when we set up our conversation, the world was relatively peaceful, and we had fear of Russian aggression, but we thought that either it was a bluff or somehow Putin will come to his senses. Neither were the case. So taking a bird's eye view of global geopolitics, how do you think, in your own mind, has the world changed for you? How has this the global forces that were going in a particular set of directions may have been realigned, and what are the implications of that?
I think it's a good question, and I'd love to hear your own views on this, Anush, as you've written so eloquently on this. I think that one of the things that the way I see it is that before Russia moved into Ukraine, you had these theoretical discussions about NATO, theoretical discussions about the European Union. You would see books written about the end of Europe, and is NATO relevant? And one of the things that Vladimir Putin has done with this invasion of Ukraine is he's rallied the European Union. He has rallied people around seeing the value of NATO in many ways. And one of the things that has been happening, certainly, I think, beginning over the last few years, is this sense of, and the Biden administration talks about this quite regularly. They talk about this distinction between techno democracies and techno authoritarian states, right? And what we've been seeing on a geopolitical level is the COVID-19 pandemic contributed to this, is a dents in globalization. Now, I do not mean, I'm not of the view that we are at the end of globalization. If we define globalization as the increasing interconnectivity of people, goods, ideas, services, we're not nearly at the end of globalization. We're still living in a 20 trillion plus trade world where people are still traveling. Is when the pandemic becomes endemic, we'll still have 1 billion plus international flights as we had before the pandemic. But what we are seeing is increasing geopolitical blocks, right? The Australia, UK, US bloc, the Japan, India, US, Australia, alliance. We're seeing these blocks emerging, and all of them are framed around the big geopolitical competition between China and the United States, right? And then what is happening is countries around the world are being asked to decide, right? Are you with us or are you with them? And the last thing Brazil wants to do, the last thing India wants to do, the last thing the UAE wants to do, the last thing Saudi Arabia wants to do is to decide, you're either with us or you're against us. So we're headed gently towards these blocks forming. But I think that what is working against those blocks becoming too hardened is we still are living in a highly globalized economic environment, highly globalized trading environment. Just look at the global commodities. Look at how taking Russia and Ukraine wheat off of the market, soars the price of wheat. Look at some of the commodities that Russia produces that many of us probably didn't know they produced, and we didn't even know how important they were to the global economy, like palladium and nickel and these sort of things. And suddenly you have these prices rise. So we are still living in this globalized world that I don't see that ending soon. But these blocks are gradually forming. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well.
With pleasure. I won't bore you with those straight away. Hopefully, if there's time later on,
Right.
we can exchange it, and Ali can
Yeah.
moderate and
Yeah.
come in with it as well. He's got views too. But given what you say, and I agree with you that there is this hardening of new cores. The Western core is not new, but the Chinese core is maybe new one. And you imply that there are opportunities now for so-called middle powers or regional powers. That makes the system a bit more fluid than it was during the first Cold War. But I've got two questions. One is, so I assume I see Russia now crumbling for the next 20 years. That'll be a long time for it to reemerge as anything resembling a major or great power. The vacuum that is left, is it going to be fought over, do you think, by these new cores? Or is it going to be a space for regional or middle powers to emerge? And I put Japan, you've already mentioned, Brazil, you've mentioned, but there is Germany, there are other ones, India, you mentioned, but Saudi Arabia, Iran itself, which seems to be in a real bind when you compare it to all of these other places, Turkey, Israel, and so on. How do you think that is shaping up?
Yeah, it's an important question, because if we go back to given the fact that this is a BRI dialogue, let's go back to the year 1993 for a moment, for two reasons. Number one is that felt like very much a unipolar world we were living in 1993, right? And it felt like that there really wasn't a major peer competitor to the United States. The world was still grappling with the post-Cold War world and the shape of that world. Around that same time, Chinese oil production was around 3.5 million barrels a day, and its oil consumption was around 3.5 million barrels per day. Well, since 1993, that line has gone up like that on consumption, but its production has stayed relatively steady. So in that delta, you have about 10.5 million barrels of Chinese purchases of oil. So this is just one example of how China has become not just a manufacturing engine of the global economy, but a demand engine of the global economy as well. Whether it's oil, gas, you name the metal, you name the commodity, China is a major importer of it, right? And as a result of that, what we've seen is the rise of China. I think Evan Osnos put it best in his book on China, where he said that the transformation of China has been at 100 times the scale and 10 times the speed of the Industrial Revolution that created modern England, right? And that transformation, that before and after picture is a before and after picture we have been seeing across the emerging world, right? You've probably experienced this, Ali, you've experienced this. I know you've spent time in Dubai. In Dubai, one of the things that's very interesting is when you go into a government office, they often have these before and after pictures. And the before is not that long ago. It's the early to mid 90s. And they have these pictures of Sheikh Zayed Road in Dubai, which had 3 or 4 buildings and a couple of low slung, houses. And then they put the after picture, which is the Manhattan style skyline on Sheikh Zayed Road. Well, there is a before and after picture in our world as well, driven by the rise of China, the rise of many emerging markets, rapid urbanization, unprecedented connectivity, growing middle classes. And as a result of that, we have these middle powers rising, right? As countries become richer, as countries, they begin to stake their claim geopolitically as well. So it's not such a simple, Cold War world. It's not such a simple unipolar world. We're living in a world where many voices are grappling and trying to, declare their voice to be heard, and therefore it's going to be a slightly more chaotic world. So the question is, back to your original question, is did this Russia invasion of Ukraine, did it order this jumbled, world of voices, and did it order the world back into these a Western bloc, right? A NATO bloc, a much stronger NATO bloc, an authoritarian state bloc, and that remains to be seen if it ordered that. But I think what we have been witnessing over the past 20, 25 years with this rise of the emerging world has been the rise of these middle powers as geopolitical players, and they will continue to be geopolitical players, which makes for a more chaotic environment.
While we're at big power game theory, you are an anchor at School of Advanced International Studies, and your founder, Paul Nitze, at the time had this window of vulnerability. Are we getting into a new stage where countries like China in particular are looking at this window and saying, what are the doors of vulnerability if the door is shut on us? And what are the lessons to be learned for China at the moment, Afshin, in this you are with us or against us? It is not about Taiwan, but how much of vulnerability is there for the BRI, as a matter of fact, as a grand game theory for China, if US tomorrow starts playing based on the same, metrics, trying to contain China? Or are we seeing, China already de-risking those or playing in order to decompress these elements?
Right. No, it's interesting, Ali, that you brought up Paul Nitze, because you can't tell, but I sit here in a modest office in Washington at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Directly behind this bookshelf is Paul Nitze's old office. So I sit right next to Paul Nitze's old office, and Paul Nitze's old office is now something that we use as a conference room, a small meeting room for VIPs, etc. But so I think it's this is a really important question, and again, let's if we go back to the 2013 when President Xi announced these two. He gave these two speeches, one in Kazakhstan and one in Indonesia, announcing the One Belt, One Road, which then had that odd formulation OBOR, which then became the Belt and Road Initiative. When he announced those two speeches, we were still, we were about 4 or 5 years on from the global financial crisis, but we were still in this ceaselessly spinning globalization world, right? And the idea of investing in the infrastructure of connectivity is sound on both levels. It was sound for China because it was a way for them to have their own construction companies do projects. It was a way for them to build alliances, in those countries that were on the receiving end of these and this infrastructure of connectivity. And then for the receiving country, it could have been a win if it was, structured well, if maybe it weren't so opaque, if there were no corruption involved in these deals, and so, because at the end of the day, when you look around the world and you look at those countries, particularly in the developing world, that have prospered and done well, one of the ingredients that they all have is a strong infrastructure of connectivity. Singapore, Dubai, Hong Kong. I mean, they all have this strong infrastructure of connectivity. And the one American business executive once told me that, look, when China builds a road or expands a port in East Africa or somewhere in South Asia, well, Coca-Cola uses that road as well, and Coca-Cola uses that port as well, and so I think what happened early on in this process was that there were a lot of willy-nilly projects. There were a lot of people running around saying, President Xi just announced this new initiative, let's go do projects. They weren't always financially sound or feasible or sustainable, but all you had to do really is slap a Belt and Road tag on the project, and you could get Chinese bank financing for the project, right? And then President Xi Jinping, when he gave his speech at the Belt and Road Forum, I think it was in 2018 or 19, he basically said, we're looking for quality projects, not just this quantity of projects. And so what we've seen is the numbers are starting to be more modest in terms of the projects that China is financing. We're seeing more quality projects play out now. here's the question that everybody is asking, and certainly in Washington, people are asking is, and it gets to the heart of your question, does China, win influence when they do these kind of, projects? And the short answer is, to me, is of course it does, in much the same way that the, European Union, infrastructure loans and to countries around the world, win them favor, in the same way that the U.S. Loans and aid win them favor. And so this is part of this great power competition. And this goes back to, Anush's point about middle powers. And if you are a middle power today, if you are even a small country today, somewhere in Africa, think about what the scramble for Africa looks like today versus the scramble for Africa in the 19th century, right? The scramble for Africa in the 19th century was exploitative. It was great powers, imposing their will on Africa. The scramble for Africa today is, 3 or 4 different groups coming in and saying, hey, we'll finance this, and we'll provide funding for this, and we'll provide and so if you are a small or middle power country, you have options now. The menu has expanded for you. You have China as an option. You have the European Union as an option. You have the United States as an option. You have BlackRock as an option. You have the world's infrastructure funds as an option. And so I just think that it's actually you're in a pretty good position if you are a middle power today.
I'm sure Anush is going to jump in, but when you talked about the menu expanding, I couldn't stop with thinking in the background that food allergies and food poisoning as well has increased on the menu.
Right. That's right. Yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
On that note, Afshin, as you were speaking, and you rightly, gave us this wonderful image of China builds a road and Coca-Cola vans drive on it. I was reminded of a book that appeared in the 1980s called Vodka Cola. And the premise and the essence of the book was that the Cold War is actually profitable in that, the Soviets and the Americans have got layers of relationships that is making the Cold War inevitably irrelevant. That is all about economics, you stupid, as one of your former presidents said. Right. But at the same time, though, I can't see quite that the Chinese and Americans can find a suitable mix of drinks that would let them get by as easily as vodka cola might have done, which is ironic given what's happening to Russia today in relation to American goods consumption and so on.
Yes.
But talking of middle powers, it is true that they have opportunity. It is true that there is more flexibility. And if they're well resourced and well positioned geopolitically, they can take advantage of these. But as you were speaking, I was minded of 2 countries which, for want of a better term, find themselves in a bit of a pickle. These 2 countries are India and Iran, right? How would you characterize their position? And if you assume, as I do, that they're in a pickle, what is the way out for them, if that would be also your line of inquiry?
Right. I think those are 2 good examples. I think India, in many ways, although I think India would, not consider itself a middle power, although, maybe economically they still are, but they would consider themselves, at the top tier of powers, and fair enough in terms of population size, military, maybe if not yet economically, but we're headed that way. And so when it comes to India, not to get too much into the weeds here, but I think that I, along with many who follow emerging markets, had a great deal of hope in Prime Minister Narendra Modi when he came into power, because I think many of us thought, okay, this is going to be a pragmatic, economics-minded, Prime Minister. Look at what he did in Gujarat. And he's going to take India in that same direction. One of the things I think he learned quickly is that India is not Gujarat, and it requires a different skill set. And I think he also got involved a little bit too much in the cult of his own personality, and a little bit too much in some of the BJP sort of hard right Hindu nationalist currents, and some of the things that he did, like the pretty radical demonetization, was very disruptive. The goods and services tax, I think, was right on target. It was just rolled out in a very clumsy way. But I think India, in so many ways, has this enormous, it's a bit like what Charles de Gaulle once said of Brazil as an underhanded critique. He said Brazil has enormous potential and it always will, right? One sees that with India as well. And when are they going to meet this enormous potential? I mean, this is a country roughly the size of China, with about 1/4 or 1/5 the per capita GDP of China, and yet enormously talented population, enormously skilled and wealthy diaspora, and so when are they going to meet this challenge? When it comes to Iran, I think that quote about enormous potential, and they always will, fits perfectly also with Iran. This is a country with the world's second largest gas reserves, the world's 4th or 5th largest oil reserves, and yet it is a country that I don't think I'm breaking any news when I say it is not managed well. Let's put aside even the human rights issues, and though one should never put that aside, but even if we were to put that aside for a moment, it's not managed well economically. It is a country that should be the Germany of the Middle East. It has an industrial base. It has a talented and skilled population. It has what was once a thriving middle class, and yet it's managed poorly. There's enormous corruption. And Iran gets itself involved in these geopolitical fights that then constrict its economic room for maneuver. So if we were to see Iran to come out of this nuclear agreement, and let us assume, I know this is this is probably going to air a few days from now rather than today, March 15th. But on today, March 15th, let us assume that we do come up with a deal, and it is ratified by all sides. It's still going to take a while for the foreign investment community to be comfortable operating in Iran again. And they have a lot of what I call post-traumatic stress disorder from their previous experiences. And it's not just because of the operating in Iran is difficult. You're operating in many countries is difficult. It's because of the heavy weight of the US Treasury that came down on them, for various things that they did, right? And then the question is, okay, well, we have a president now who is pushing for this, revival of the JCPOA. Who's going to be the president 3 years from now, right? And general counsels, generally in big companies, whether it be Renault or Barclays or you name it, they're going to be much more cautious when it comes to dealing with Iran. So what we could see is Iranian oil flowing back, which would it's important for Iran, and it's important now for the world's oil markets for Iran's oil to flow back. We could see its natural gas beginning to live up to its potential, which, by the way, Anush and Ali, I think that one of the reasons why, and this is pure speculation, but it's one of the reasons why Russia seems to be making these demands on the JCPOA and slowing the final phase of the JCPOA is because if you are Russia, you see the fact that you're being cut out of oil and gas markets. Iran could easily be the one that replaces a part of your market share. And oil and gas is very much a market share story. And Iran's natural gas has never really lived up to its potential. I understand that they use a lot of that natural gas at home for industrial production, but Iran could be a natural fit for increased natural gas exports to Europe. There's a lot of Iranian oil floating on tankers that could then be released. So I think Russia has never been, let's put it this way, uncomfortable with Iran's isolation. They have never been uncomfortable with that because Iran is a potential direct competitor to Russia in natural gas markets, certainly, but also in oil markets.
I think this PTSD that we were talking about, I'm going to coin and phrase a term of a phrase here with the three of us. I call it post-traumatic sanctions disorder.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
And it affects the societies, as a matter of fact, as we all three know it. That, you know, the elite always gets stronger and the power base gets shrunken, and the average people are suffering. And I couldn't agree more with you, Afshin, about the long-term, you know, dividends of a JCPOA. And Iran today has less than 1% of global gas markets. It's unbelievable. Second largest gas reserves, less than 1% of global gas market. But in light of that, I wanted you to share your nuggets of wisdom with us on this strategic partnership deal of 25 years and 400 billion or 280 billion. Because of that once bitten, shy twice by Renaults and, you know, Totals of the world and Gs of the world, is Iran a lost cause in terms of foreign direct investment by Western players? And if this deal is signed, for how long it lasts, is it going to be the dough of the pizza and many of the toppings belong to China as a result of these long sanctions? Or do you think that the toppings will be given to Western companies as well?
You know, this is really, I've thought a lot about this just in the past week, Ali, because when I looked at what Russia has done and how China is either supporting them or not. I mean, you saw the reports just today about the US is saying that China has offered military support for Russia. Now, if that really does come to fruition, and if President Xi, you know, actually goes all in, recall before Russia, you know, moved on Ukraine, there was that meeting between President Xi and Putin, which, by the way, was meeting number 39 or number 40. I'm keeping count, right? And in that meeting, they described it as a no limits partnership, right? Now, okay, let's see how no limited this partnership is, because if China actually does move towards supporting Russia materially, openly, then you could have an environment where there are secondary sanctions on China. You could have an environment where not only, you know, U.S. sanctions, European sanctions. That's a game changer. You know, you can, you know, we've already seen how disruptive it is when you try to take a much smaller economy like Russia's economy out of the global system, right? Imagine trying to take an economy like China. Okay, that's far out into the world. The reason I bring that up is because I've always felt that China had, because of its relations with the United States, because of its integration with the global economy, because of its integration with Europe, right, has always been able to say to Iran, rhetorically, theoretically, we stand with you, right? But when push comes to shove, China would look out for its own economic interests, and they never wanted to be on the receiving end of U.S. sanctions. They never wanted to be on the receiving end of pension fund de-investment campaigns, you know, and you know, this is, I think, a really important point, because when you look back at this kind of raft of sanctions that have come against Iran, then you look back at these China MOUs that are signed with Iran fairly regularly, including this, you know, 400 billion. I don't even know what the number is, because it was a completely fictitious number, but whatever the number was, they come out there and they sign these, and then China drags its feet. China generally drags its feet on many of its Iran projects, to the point where, you know, you may have experienced this when I would speak to officials from Iran or from the Chamber of Commerce or from, you know, the National Iranian Oil Company. They would reserve some of their most frustrated scorn for China, because their view was that they sign these agreements with us and then they don't do anything about the agreements, or they drag their feet on the agreements, while not hesitating about pouring $40–50 billion into Pakistan. Why? Why was China hesitating? Part of it is because they're integrated in the US system, integrated in Europe, and they actually would thump their chest about secondary sanctions and tertiary sanctions, but they would fall in line, right? They would fall in line because there's plenty of other oil, there's plenty of other gas, there's plenty of other places you can get the things that you want to get. So the way I view the China-Iran situation and this long-term, you know, 25-year deal that they have signed, I still am unclear on the details of this. Is I still view it within that prism of China still sees itself as a global player, still sees the United States as an important market where 400 billion plus goods go to, still does not want to be on the bad side of the United States, and therefore will always treat Iran in a limited fashion, will treat Iran in a transactional way. They'll purchase the oil, they'll purchase some of their natural gas. You recall during the heavy sanctions years, many Iranian, the Iranian central bank couldn't receive dollars for the oil that the National Iranian Oil Company was sending to China, South Korea, India, Japan, and others. And what was happening is they had these huge renminbi, accounts in Chinese banks, and then they had to buy a lot of industrial machinery with that renminbi accounts, and China was, raising the price 10 or 15%, in the process. So I still view it in that prism. But the reason I brought up this whole thing about China, the U.S. increasing blocks is if China does become more isolated, if we are in a world 5 years from now where China is not where the decoupling of China and the U.S. is further along, then China doesn't see as heavy a cost to going much deeper into Iran.
Right. Brilliant analysis. Thank you, Afshin, very much. If I was sitting in Beijing, I've got several questions to follow up, but I'm sure Ali won't let me put all three at once. So I'll start with the first one, and that is, so if I was sitting in Beijing and I'm looking at JCPOA coming to fruition, and I see Russia being weakened economically, militarily, and diplomatically, therefore its isolation provides opportunities, I would see this as win-win, because I get the JCPOA done, Total doesn't go in to explore Iran's gas. Hey, maybe we can do it with the Koreans or with the Japanese. And hey presto, we've got a second line, not excluding Russia, but a second line in terms of insurance of access to cheap gas and relatively affordable oil from Iran. That JCPOA is in our interest, but also if Russia is getting weaker, well, let it. So while the Chinese refrain from coming out, as it were, in support of the international community's position on Russia, deep down, they might be content that it's going their way, right?
Yeah.
Is that how you're seeing the tea leaves?
Yeah. No, I think you make a really good point, Anush, because as you say, that in my view, the Totals of the world will be hesitant. The Shells of the world will be hesitant to go back into Iran, next month, next year, but the CNPC won't, and maybe CNOOC won't, and some of the other companies that already have existing contracts in Iran, whether it's the South Pars gas field or other places, they'll actually can ramp up some of the things that they were dragging their feet on before, and they can do it with the full blessing of the U.S. government, in a sense, right? Because it's the JCPOA. It was essentially, in its very beginnings, was as a way to get Iran reintegrated into the global to slow down their enrichment program. But then people who are negotiators for the JCPOA would say, and then this will bring Iran into the international community. The idea is it could potentially, quote unquote, moderate their behavior. I mean, we can have a whole debate on that. But that was the idea, right? And so now CNPC can go in. Were it not for the Russia invasion of Ukraine, Rosneft, might have gone in, and maybe Rosneft will still go in, and maybe that's why Lavrov is so intent on ensuring that they can do business in Iran, because Gazprom can go in to Iran, and it's a way. If our gas is going to be significantly truncated, well, let's get a piece of this Iranian natural gas that is going to go into Europe, right? So I think your basic analysis is correct, Anush. That I think Beijing does see this as a potential win.
Afshin, I am, sitting here and listening to what you're sharing with us. And I'm thinking that, yes, if the world says to China, do not go for this full unlimited partnership, and if China finds itself in a bind that behind the scenes, like many other things, wants to support Russia, should the monetary levers be used against China? Don't you think that there will be a potential, all chips on the table with Taiwan as well? And if that is the case, in this quagmire, the West will find itself very compromised if China makes that move on all, chips on the table. And that, as a result, definitely Iran doesn't have an assurance for the next 2 or 3 years that the deal will stand. So land routes of energy supplies through Russia and Iran, now Afghanistan is also out of the equation, will make that heartland theory and Eurasia very much like a crazy glue together. So as Ram Emanuel said, no crisis is too good of an opportunity to be let go to waste, every crisis, right? Yeah. So how much of this is perceived from their optics as an opportunity for bringing this crazy glue together?
One of the interesting things is when you look at China's trade flows, and there's still a very heavy U.S. focus, a very heavy Europe focus, and the reason that China has risen, and let's not forget, this is truly a historic geoeconomic rise. We haven't seen this geoeconomic level of rise, any time in human history, really. When you consider where China was in 1979 to where China is today, where China was in 1979, which was at literally about 90 to 95% of the country living in poverty. Today about 5 to 7% live in poverty, right? That's just an absolute flipping of that chart, right? So, but the part of the reason, and actually a key part of the reason that China is where it is today is because of the fact that they were selling goods into U.S. markets and European markets and increasingly to Asian markets as well, but Asian markets that are U.S. allies. And so while they will invest in sub-Saharan Africa, they'll invest in Pakistan, they'll invest in these places, and they'll win some influence. Their companies will win some contracts. The money will recirculate from a Chinese, export bank, back to a Chinese construction company. Jobs will be created, etc. At the end of the day, their bottom line and their foreign exchange reserves don't rise from those sort of things. It's the trade with the U.S. and trade with Europe. So this is why I say that China still, in my view, would have to value those relationships, which is why they're able to say to Iran without saying to Iran that we're simply not going to do these deals with you that you want us to do with you, as long as you are seen as a pariah by Washington. But when Washington, says you're no longer a pariah, and when there's a JCPOA deal, we will do these deals with you. And then, quietly, sure, let's build this Eurasia, the heartland, of connectivity while we're at it. But China also has the same problem that Iran has in the region, and China has it globally, which is this. They often overplay their hand. They can often be clumsy. What the old adage, they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and if you look at China's relationships within, remember Halford Mackinder talked about whosoever, controls Eastern Europe, commands, the heartland, commands the world island. Well, China had this 16+1, and then it became the 17+1 arrangement with Eastern European countries. And it felt very imperial, because they would have these meetings, and who's the +1? China, of course, is the +1, and it's us as the +1 and 17, Eastern European and Central European countries, right? But several of those countries became disillusioned and said, these meetings aren't going anywhere. China is not delivering on the things that they said they were going to deliver. We don't like how they're, talking to us. And so it has fizzled a little bit, this 17+1. So this is it's a long way of saying, in my view, if you are in Beijing, you need to still value the US relationship. You need to still value your European relationships. And if you decide that you want to sacrifice those relationships for this alliance with Russia, then you're going to pay a very heavy economic price.
Absolutely agreed with you, Afshin. So let's put a however in there then.
Yes.
And so you're quite right. If you look at the map of the BRI highways, and one of the problems of depicting these as over as it was is a road starts somewhere and it ends somewhere.
Right.
And that has physical as well as mental limitations, boundaries to it, which is, I'm sure, not China's intention.
Yeah.
But here we are. We've got, you look at the map and you see these wonderful multicolors, 6 of them meandering across Eurasia with the intention of ending up at the heart of the European Union.
Yes.
Coming to the UK and Norway, those which are not in the European Union, right? And suddenly, the Russians put a bloody big hole in the middle of several of these highways that China had been banking on, because Afghanistan, you can argue Iran and Turkey, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan are put in a different category, but these countries were mere bridges to the gold mine. This closer interaction with the European Union, which is pull it away from the United States, create this Eurasian giant that China will then hopefully dominate. Russia has now put a complete spanners in all of that. And pending where China stands, the closer it appears to be cuddling the Russian bear, the more cautious, as you rightly said, the Europeans are going to be. But if the Europeans begin to harden their own shell and create their own alternatives, which have already done actually, in terms of their own global network, rival to BRI, then China is really up the creek without a paddle. And it can only blame Russia for this, because Ukraine would have been an important endgame for the Eurasian end of the BRI.
Yes.
So what is going on, and how are Chinese going to manage to contain this, given how much President Xi Jinping has put around this BRI stall, and that now over 100 countries and billions of dollars have been committed to it?
Yes. Yeah. And, we obviously brand Russia dramatically tarnished, by this. No, obviously, but brand China also tarnished by what Russia is doing. This sense that China is behind, Vladimir Putin, or we're not sure where China stands on this, and therefore European Union countries are going to be looking at China with a more wary eye. I'm just summarizing what you said. But then you have to look at companies, right? How are companies going to operate when you have these vast, far-flung supply chains? We already began to see, a lot of light manufacturing, the really cheap manufacturing move from China to other places, Vietnam and Cambodia and elsewhere. But it's hard to replace the scale of some of these, factories that are in China. And you already have an existing relationship. Let's just say you are a sporting goods company, and you have an existing relationship with a factory in China that is producing hockey sticks for you, right? Are you really going to, unless you're forced to, are you really going to say, well, you know what, let's look at, Cambodia, or let's look at Bangladesh, because you have this existing relationship, it's working out well, the hockey sticks are flowing. Are you really? And so the question I often ask in these situations is, because you read articles about deglobalization, about how multilateral trade alliances are dying or dead, et cetera, even though that may be the case, but the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, linking potentially 54 African markets together, has recently passed. It's got a long way to go till it's in operation. But anyway, you have to look at companies and what are companies doing? And companies are realizing that we have supply chain problems. Yes. But is the answer that we onshore everything or reshore everything? Or is the answer that we have just a much far more further flung supply chain? So we continue operating in China, but we also operate in Vietnam. We also operate, parts of East Africa. We also, because if there's a geopolitical crisis in one part of the world, we need to be able to move our supply chain to other parts of the world. So the answer to supply chain problems, supply chain folks are telling us, is it's not reshoring everything or onshoring everything. It's actually having a deeper, a more international supply chain. So I say all of this to say that while countries are looking with China with a warier eye, we have to follow what companies are doing. And companies, we haven't yet seen any significant exodus from China. We've seen, in fact, the opposite. We've seen companies, particularly financial services players, trying to get deeper into China's markets as they've opened up their financial services retail markets.
Afshin, you sit in the city that sets the agenda for the world in more ways than one, and the think tank. So I want to, for the sake of our audience who come to these talks to listen to guests as noble as yourself, be a bit of a devil's advocate. So when there are think tanks who in the States say that China has to be stopped in its tracks, right? So from a risk point of view, China says, oh, wait a minute, I invited you to BRI, you didn't want to come, now you're with Build Back Better World. I'm extending again, I think it was a few days ago, I don't know if you read it on the anniversary of Nixon's visit, that, hey, you're still more than welcome to come to our party, and we would be more than happy to bring our own booze to your Build Back Better World as well. But do you agree in terms of that table that you spoke about that has been turned upside down in terms of lifting people out of poverty, focus on education, things that people like Ray Dalio talk about as well? Aren't the biggest threats to US prosperity within US being preoccupied by how to stop others' growth rather than focusing on education and the divide between the haves and the have-nots? And how much of oxygen is sucked in US in thinking how to stop China rather than how to fix US?
It's a really important question. And I can just give you an anecdote here in the sense that I was talking to a senior US official recently, and I asked him, to kind of lay out his 3 top priorities for foreign and national security policy. And he said, well, number 1 is China. Number 2 is China, and number 3 is China, right? So and sitting in a think tank in Washington and being in Washington for a long time, I've obviously failed in my job because I've been advocating for a long time to U.S. policymakers that, what I'd love to see is a very robust international development policy, right? And it doesn't mean foreign aid, right? It doesn't mean, giving money to, autocracies. It means a robust international development policy, and I'd like to see the U.S. Get into that business more because if you believe in eradicating poverty, then you should applaud just about most infrastructure projects, right? Because that's one step on the ladder of eradicating poverty. Now, we all know that there's 12, 15, 18, nothing as complex as that has one step, but there's many steps, but that's one step. And so when I see these infrastructure projects, under BRI umbrella, under European Union umbrella, under a Build Back Better umbrella, in the US, I applaud them because we need more of this, and the demands are immense. But when the way I look at the world is that we have this world where we have about 7.7 billion people. We have growing middle classes with rising expectations. That are rapidly urbanized, increasingly wired, increasingly connected, and therefore there is both promise and peril in that, right? The peril is if you don't create enough jobs, particularly in young populations in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in young populations in the Middle East and North Africa, you're going and you have middle classes with rising expectations, more people going to college. Those are the conditions for instability. But there's also promise in this for this very same reasons, right? You have middle classes rapidly urbanized with disposable income. So where you stand on these issues depends often on where you sit, right? If you sit in the board of a consumer-facing multinational company, you say, I'm going to go chase that growth in Africa. I'm going to go chase that growth in Asia. I'm going to chase that growth in Latin America. And we're seeing that play out. If you sit as a national security strategist, you wonder, whoa, how are these jobs are going to be created? Is China winning influence, through these infrastructure projects? Are they capturing governments, in this process? And I've often argued that, the national security folks need to spend more time talking to the business and the traders, folks, because then you get kind of a different world outlook. And I'm not privileging the business and traders world outlook. I'm saying they need to understand, they need to learn from the national security folks as well. So that's a long way of saying that the China sucks up a lot of the oxygen here in Washington. And as a result, and the other thing that sucks up oxygen in Washington is crisis, right? So now it's Russia, right? But while we're lurching from crisis to crisis, there are deep tectonic shifts happening in our world, and we need to do more of this kind of long-term strategic thinking of the sort that both of you do. So I thank you for indulging me and listening to me for a little bit.
Hey, Ali, and I can always do with a pat on the back, Afshin. So we'll take that. Absolutely. Actually, that was a fantastic question Ali posed, and your response is brilliant. Fukuyama was on our radio, on our airwaves recently, and it was really ironic because he was asked about his book End of History, and he said without a hint of irony, well, that was about that moment, forgetting that history doesn't really end. Okay.
No.
So here we are in a potentially repolarizing world, and it wasn't too long ago that COP26 met in Glasgow with a long list of ambitions and targets indeed. And I know that you have a particular interest in the environment dimension as well, Afshin.
Yeah.
So given again that Russia is now dropped the world into a very dark place on so many levels, do you think that maybe kind of neutral issues like the environment provides a platform for the business as well as the state communities across these voids to try and rebuild the relationships better and actually deal alongside the crises with the long-term problems that the planet faces? What do you think?
Yeah, I do, and I think that one of the things that is fascinating about the environment, around the environment debate, around climate debate, is the unanimity, the widespread international government unanimity on the need to, quote unquote, do something, right? There's differences in what we need to do, and how to get to net zero emissions, et cetera. But you do have, this unique moment where you have just virtually about every government in the world coming to agreement that we need to, quote unquote, do something. Now, having said that, I think the key word in energy transition is transition. And we are still living in a fossil fuel world. And we will likely be living in a fossil fuel dominant world for another generation. And the reason I say this is because we are at about 80% or so of the world's demand right now for energy met by fossil fuels, right? So this is not an overnight switch. We're not going to be, able to go renewable 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 80%, 15, 20 years from now. It's going to take a long time. And as a result, what is happening, though, that is interesting in the world of energy is that because of this unanimity, not only among governments, but also among the financial sector, right? There has been less willingness to invest in new oil and gas exploration by companies like ExxonMobil and Shell and others, right? And therefore, the new oil and gas exploration that is happening by Saudi Aramco and Abu Dhabi National Oil Company and Rosneft and others. And so what is happening is that during this transition period, where we're still going to need fossil fuel for a lot of things, the national oil companies are rising in power and influence, and they still have a good 20-25 years left in them in terms of their rise in power and influence, but as long as we understand that that this is a transition, and it's going to take time. And the reason it's going to take time is precisely because of, what I said about rising middle classes that are rapidly urbanizing and unprecedented connectivity, because those same middle classes, imagine the American middle class of post-World War II, right? As it demanded more goods and services and plastics and, and gas and oil. Well, add 3 billion or so, 4 billion people to that, right? I mean, according to my colleagues down the street at the Brookings Institution, we are at about 3.7, 3.8 billion people in the global middle class today, right? So 3.7, 3.8 billion people consuming more. And so it's the key is energy transition. You do have this unique moment where there's a virtual unanimity and people can come together on this issue. But I've often argued that we have to be careful about this idea that we are going to somehow make oil and gas producers a pariah, because when you do that, you're raising the status of the national oil companies around the world.
I know that we have to bring this to a closure, so I'm going to share something that is very close to my heart. Anush will be nodding, I'm sure. I've written a paper that Anush has been a champion for as well, and publicly went even to East-West Institute, because I don't think it's about oil and gas. As you rightly said, we will remain dependent on it. It's not even about how we burn them necessarily or how we secure them, but as a matter of fact, how we find wars around energy. And I have lobbied at Afshin for a measurement of scope 1, 2, and 3 of arbitrary wars and aggressions, measuring them with companies like DeepMind and others, and sending a carbon tax bill to, Afshin, are you there?
I'm here. I lost you for a second, but I'm
no
back.
Worries. So sending a carbon tax bill to aggressors for the scope 1, 2, and 3 of the emissions of wars. And what better way to prevent future conflicts, one would think, like the one right now, and to send a carbon tax to Russia, or future of Taiwan and to China, and Afghanistan and Iraq, because I genuinely believe if we measure the footprint of wars, that would be one of the biggest polluters in this net zero. I don't know your...
No, these are the kind of ideas that out of the box ideas I think that we need to get to net zero emissions. Now, tell me, I don't see myself moving on the screen. Am I frozen on the screen?
You are a bit frozen, but we're going to bring it to a closure, because
all right.
we don't know what happened there. You look very serious and very.
You still look good.
You look very good, of course, and I wanted to say that what is your one advice to cinephobes and to cinephiles, Afshin? If you were to leave both sides with one piece of advice, what would that be?
I think that maybe the piece of advice is that to remember that remember the Chinese middle class, right? This is a population that has the same kind of universal aspirations that middle classes around the world have, and we often forget them in our debates about China, because we're debating President Xi all the time, but we're not talking about the Chinese middle class. And I understand that in an authoritarian environment, it's easy to dismiss those who are in the middle class, but I don't think we should. I think they do play a very prominent role in the future of China.
Brilliant. It's my role to bring closure to our discussions, but I do this very hesitantly and very reluctantly, Afshin, because I've enjoyed so much listening to you and having this conversation with you on so many different issues, on so many levels, and you've responded so completely fully to our interrogation and have been extremely insightful and honest in terms of what you've given us. So I really am appreciative of your time and effort. And I, as you know, I follow you avidly in terms of what you do and what you say and what you write. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have you as our guest. And rest assured that Ali and I will continue to follow your successes and progress. And we'll be looking to you to come back to us as a guest, perhaps after the dust settles in Europe, to take your take two on what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine. But for now, though, I'm really grateful. Ali and I are both very grateful to you for having accepted the invitation to come and talk to us and for having been so amazingly engaging with us. Thank you, Afshin.
Thank you, Afshin.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anush. Thank you, Ali. It's really been a great pleasure. I think that you may have lost me on the screen, but it's been a great pleasure to speak with both of you. And I look forward to listening to future BRI dialogues as well. And I look forward to seeing both of you not in celluloid, but in 3D live and in person in Washington, London, or somewhere in the world.
Thank you, Anush. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.